Hi, I'm Tameika Isaac Devine. I'm a wife, a mom, an entrepreneur, and a city councilwoman.
Hello, I'm Jamie Devine, a husband, a father, and a community champ. I've been married to my wife, Tameika, for over 15 years.
Join us as we interview some of our favorite couples, hear their stories, and be inspired.
The secret to our successful marriage is that we are very intentional about our date nights.
Hi, my name is Jamie.
Hi, I'm Tameika.
And
we are the Devines. Thank you so much for joining us for Date Night with the Devines. Today we are so honored to have with us as our very first guest for Date Night with the Devines, a couple that inspires us so much. And that is Pastor Charles B. Jackson Sr. and the First Lady of Brookland Baptist Church, Robin Jackson.
Thank you so kindly.
Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We appreciate y'all so much. The reason that Jamie and I decided we wanted to do this show, and the Lord really placed it on our heart, is people are always reaching out to us and saying how our love and our marriage inspires them. But we made us start thinking about, well, who do we look to for guidance and inspiration? And of course, the first couple that came to our minds were the two of you. Yep. You guys have been instrumental in our marriage and raising our family. And so we wanted to introduce our guests to you, to learn a little bit more about you and get inspiration from you guys as well. So we're so glad that y'all are here.
Very good. So, Pastor Jackson, we'll start with you first. How did you all meet?
First of all, let me say how honored I am that you would think of the two of us after 44 years of marriage. We hope that there's something about our marriage that will give some encouragement and inspiration to others as well. Now, there's a slight variation perhaps between how I see us having met and how Robin sees us having met. So I defer to her if you don't mind. Robin, would you like to bring the attention to how we met somewhere when I was scheduled to preach as a youth pastor when I was but 17 years old?
Okay, very good.
That's so funny. That's so funny. Actually, it's not much of a variation, but somewhat. Okay, we met at the Zion Baptist Church. And that Sunday, I was invited along with my friends to come to their youth service. And so back in that day, your parents wouldn't let you go anywhere unless your siblings went with you.
All right.
And then they didn't let you go too far out of your regular things that you would do on Sunday morning.
Right.
Being a member of Friendship Baptist Church, we was very active in our church as well. So I went to the Zion Baptist Church with my girlfriends, not knowing what to expect, but knowing that it was a youth service. Okay. And so when I got there, here comes this young man across the pulpit, and all my girlfriends and I were sitting there, and he comes across, and they immediately start shrugging each other, oh my God, And so I'm like, just another man.
Right.
Right. So I'm like, I'm here just, for the service.
Right.
And so after the service, of course, he really did a very good job preaching to the youth. And back in that day, as well as today, it's so important that our youth are reached. And so being a very active member in my church, I thought after the service, after enjoying it so much, I said, I would love for him to come to my church. Yes.
I'm with you so long.
And so after, the girls with me would say, well, who's going to introduce us? I'm like, oh, y'all just going a little bit too far. So I said, I'll introduce us. And I'll ask him if he would come to my church to speak to our youth. Okay. So after service, I went up and I introduced myself and told him how much I enjoyed the service, and I would like for him to come to speak to our youth.
Oh, wow.
Well, I went home, and right after then, he said, well, give me your phone number.
Huh?
And so I gave him my number and told him to call me right after church. Well, back in those days, the deacons who would meet at your house, your grandfather would be sitting around the table. My grandfather was a deacon.
Okay.
And so I asked my grandfather, can I call the preacher and ask the preacher, can this young minister come and preach for us? And so we did.
Oh, wow.
And because I knew he was going to call me that afternoon. And so I called my minister, and this is the funny thing about this whole thing. And my minister said to my grandfather, no, I'm not going to let no young minister come in my pulpit.
Wow.
Well, back in those days, the older ministers wouldn't allow that.
Right.
And so I was so disappointed because I knew he was going to call. And so how was I going to break this news to him and tell him that he couldn't come to my church? Right? Okay. So then he called, and I told him, no, they won't let you come. Would you believe we were in our 50s before he actually got a chance to come to the church.
Really?
50s?
Yes,
I knew it was a long time.
It was
The
a
invitation
long
was extended.
time, a long time.
You said you were going to invite me, but I never received the invitation.
He never received the invitation until around in our 50s. And back then, that time was another pastor, of course.
Right.
And it's just so crazy how God has a purpose for your life. And you don't know what this purpose is. You don't know who you're going to meet. And you have all the good intentions of doing something good for other people.
Right.
And out of this came a union that I had no idea that I would meet a minister of all people, meet a minister and marry a minister. And my girlfriends actually would say to me, you marry a minister?
I concur 99.93%.
So where's your variation?
I'm not so sure who gave who the telephone number or who called who. The truth is, it took us a long time to get to that church to preach.
You called me.
All right.
I wouldn't have called you because I don't do those things.
All right.
Right.
Okay.
Y'all, please go ahead and eat while we finish the
Oh, okay.
conversation.
All right.
So that is amazing. So how old were you guys at that time?
I was 18 and a freshman at Benedict College.
Okay.
And I must have been around that age, 17. Yes,
Okay.
17. Yeah.
So you don't find people nowadays who meet at such a young age and are still together. So that's amazing.
That's good.
Yeah.
So good. So let me ask. No matter the variation on how you met,
I think we're okay.
how'd you figure out that she was the one? I mean, I'm sure at that age there were lots of folks who were thinking that he looks pretty good. So what made you think that she's the one?
Significant from my perspective was her love for the Lord Jesus Christ. She was a Christian, and I believed in the Spirit of God that I saw in her. Because I was a young preacher at that time, having been a licensed preacher for 8 years, because I began preaching with a license at 10 years old, and so I was 18 years old preaching at the Zion Chapel Church for the Youth Day observance, and so that was key and paramount for me to know that she believed in the Lord Jesus Christ. And then she was a musician, and she the old time way basically was a benefit to a pastor if I were to become a pastor to have a wife who knew something about music, because see, I could not sing. I did not have the gift of talent of singing, so I did not sing. So maybe the Lord was looking out for me and sending someone in my direction who sang real well.
That's right.
And when I heard her sing, I said, oh,
That's it.
oh man, the Lord may be at work for real.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's all right.
In fact, I don't think he heard me sing until I was in a Jabberwock. You know the Jabberwock?
Yeah.
Jabberwocks. Yeah, Delta. I was in a Jabberwock contest. And it was at Allen University, and that's when I got a chance to see him again. And yes, and so it was at that Jabberwock contest, and I think I won. I sang, and I saw him there, and again, we got numbers and called.
Wow.
And it started again. Yeah.
So how long did you guys date before you decided to get married?
It was 4 years.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
So, kind of what you talked about, that leads me to really a really pressing question for me. I mean, one of the things that we talk about a lot when we're talking to couples is the importance of having someone who supports your goals and your vision and your dreams. And what Pastor Jackson just said about, really the Lord played a part in bringing y'all together, but because certainly the Lord had a plan for his life, starting as a youth minister and building Brookland Baptist Church from, you know, what some people would call a small country church to a mega church with an international impact, over 8,000 members at this point. And so I know he didn't like the name mega church, but it really is a mega church. And we're now in, you know, phase 3. We've got 2 campuses. I mean, it's been amazing. So with that, how do you see your role in supporting the vision that God had for him and making sure that with everything that comes at him, you're able to support him, but also be yourself and pursue your goals and your dreams?
Okay. Well, as I said before, it was not my desire to marry a minister, but I also look at it as God's plan and will for my life. In fact, we were 17, as I said, when we met, and upon dating and deciding to get married at an early age, we married at 21, and I was still in school at the University of South Carolina, majoring in music. In fact, in performance, in vocal performance. And having one more semester to complete before we actually got married, and him leaving Benedict and graduating, and then moving on to seminary. And so prior to him going to seminary, and prior to my actually graduating with one more semester, he asked if I would marry him before he went to seminary.
Okay.
Of course, I had to go to my mom and my dad and ask them because I was not quite finished with school. And they said, if you really feel that you want to marry him and he's the one, then it's okay.
Good.
So what happened? I left. He left for seminary, and we married prior to that. And I just feel that, again, this is God's will. I don't think I've missed anything from not going into performance because I've been able to use my talents at the Brookland Baptist Church from an early onset of our marriage, and as director of the youth choir, of which when I first was thrust into it, I had no idea of how to direct children. Everything was about Robin, and it wasn't about performing and moving on in the direction that I was pursuing.
Right.
And he really supported that even when he went to seminary. And we never looked at it as anything separate, but because of our individuality, we accepted each other for who that person was. And so as I supported him in his gifts and what God had in planned for him to move on to the seminary, he supported me in my music, and knowing that I had to complete it so that I could continue to do what I wanted to do. And so he left, as I said, and then he came back to my recital at the university. And of course, we were married then. And then, of course, I got into the church aspect of it all.
Right.
So I graduated thinking that, hey, I'm going to New York. I'm going to see the big lights. I'm going to perform on stage.
Right.
But God said what? No, I have something else in plan for you. And so I accepted it because I loved him. Right. And I didn't look at the ministry as anything of a struggle because I was so confident in who I was and what I was doing until I just accepted it for what it was. Right. I liked the person. I liked his humor. I liked the fun times. I just liked being with him. And we really connected as friends. Right. And so as I accepted my role as a pastor's wife, I didn't look at it so much as a pastor's wife, but just as a wife and as a friend and doing what I had to do. Right. And so through the years, I can honestly say I just do what I have to do. There is no struggle in anything I'm doing as a pastor's wife. I accept the role. I try to be an example for others. As I said, we came into it not with me actually having a role in the church at that time in a ministry, But because of the music, I was thrust upon being the director of the children's choir. And I said, oh my gosh, I do not know what to do with the children's choir.
Right.
And so I did, and that choir grew with God's grace to over 100 children through the years.
Good,
And
good.
I began really having a love for children at that time, because also I started having my own children. And so that put me in another kind of arena, an area of my life and love in serving, but serving outside of myself, but serving to help others. And so that became my ministry. And so,
Let me say this,
Yes.
before we go too much further, before you get into the book, let me just ask the pastor just one question.
So when you all were separated, I don't want to separate, when you went to seminary, how long was seminary?
3 years.
3 years. So were you back and forth? Were you
Yes.
in Atlanta, or were you?
Did not stay in Atlanta a single weekend. The curriculum was so designed that commuting pastors would have classes suspended on Monday, and they concluded on Fridays at 12 noon.
Okay.
So therefore, I would take care of the pastor work on the weekend and share time with Robin during that time, and then leave Monday late afternoon, make our way to classes, and then at 12 Friday we would return. And I was fortunate to have a seminary roommate who lived in Whiteville, North Carolina, so we would ride together.
Okay.
And so therefore, neither of us was alone. Also, the first year, had a seminary roommate, the Reverend Stanley Walker from Greenville, South Carolina. His wife and Robin were cousins, so they lived together while we were there.
Okay, very good.
Right.
So in this age, and young people go through a lot, and we hear a lot about people living apart and living separated. During that time, in your opinion, was there any temptations to look at other people or to be with other people, or were you just committed to what you were doing at that time?
The word for me is focus, and I will reference that probably later on. The word for me is focus. I was so committed to the Brookland church ministry, and I did not look upon our marriage as being separate from the Brookland church ministry. And so the total commitment was the larger picture of the Brookland church ministry, of which I thought Robin was a significant part, because I would want to think that the major influence and inspiration in our marriage and sustain our marriage is that we had a mutual respect for the other's gifts and talents and several abilities. And that was very, very important. She had a respect for what God had called me to do. I had a respect for what God had called her to do. And so we kind of integrated those two into a complete whole.
That's good. That's good.
So, and I do want to get to the book because that's part of what, led you to write this.
Vision made plain. We have whatever you need. Video, branding, photography, social media. Turning vision into reality. Day to night with the Devines. Day to night with the Devines. Have a day tonight with the Devines. Day tonight with the Devines. You and your boo have joined hands. Now you're asking what is the next plan. The possibilities institute a partnership. You and your spouse will never ever strike out. If you're looking to enhance your family life or building your careers, keep love in the center, support at the core, and turn on your listening ears. Day to night with the Devine.
Welcome back, and thank you guys again for joining us for Date Night with the Devines. We are here at the amazing Brookland Banquet and Conference Center having lunch, our double date this month with our pastor and First Lady, Charles B. Jackson Sr. and Robin Jackson. And again, thank y'all so much for having lunch with Jamie and I, and really sharing some information that we think that will be a blessing to those watching us. So before we went to break and wanted to introduce our sponsors, I was about to ask you, Mrs. Jackson, about just the way your journey has been. And you have this amazing book, Pleasures and Perils. Two Ministers' Wives Reflect on Friendship, Marriage, and Ministry, that you co-wrote with your friend and fellow First Lady, Margie Flowers. And so you were talking about just being true to your gifts and being supportive of each other and your gifts. And you have the gift of music, and that's where you kind of started off. And I don't think that when you were doing that, you thought that you would become an author, but you have been. So tell us what made you decide to write this book, and what do you think will give, especially not just the pastors' wives, but wives in general, about being a wife and how that being a partner in a marriage works.
Okay. Well, I never thought that I would write a book.
Right.
No, it was the farthest thing from my mind, but I always journaled. And I began journaling back in the 80s, and not knowing where it would take me, or if it wasn't my desire for it to reach anybody, but was just me throwing my thoughts out on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and my feelings as I went through life and its different challenges and good things as well as bad things. So I never thought that I would write a book. But it was when my husband and I traveled to Florida. We were on our way actually to visit our friend, Reverend Stanley Walker, in Tallahassee, Florida. And we were with two other friends of ours, and the young lady who also is my best friend, who co-authored the book, Margie Flowers, and her husband. So all of us were in the van, and we were traveling towards going to Tallahassee. And so as we traveled, we had conversations, and one of the conversations was our husbands are always going places and preaching and speaking. And we jokingly said, oh my, well, we need to start going places and speaking, and we can do that, too. Mm-hmm. So in a jokey kind of a way, not really thinking that anything was going to come out of this. And so my husband said, well, Robin, let's think about this. I really think that you need to really tell your story.
Right.
And so Margie and I looked at each other, and we said, really? And so he said, I think people really want to know how you made it. How did you do it? How did you do it for this length of time, and still doing well, and having raised two children who are achievers and doing well in life, and our marriage still being fruitful and in a loving state. So he said, people need to know how you're doing this. And so Margie and I looked at each other, and of course her husband being the joker in the group, Dave said, yeah, Margie, yeah, I think you all need to do this. The two of you need to co-author this and do this. And so we said, now, if you all are really serious, are you serious about this? Do you think that people would really want to hear what we have to say? And so, and then again, we asked our husbands, we said, are you sure that you want us to tell the story?
Right.
And so they went, oh, yes, people need to know this. Right. So Margie and I contemplated on it after the trip and prayed over it, talked to our husbands again to make sure that they were in agreement with us doing this. And then thinking about what we would actually say. So from that, we looked at our journals. I did not know that Margie had journaled for so many years. She did not know that I had journaled. And we've been friends for over 40 years.
Wow.
We got married on the same day, 3 hours apart. Neither of us could attend the other's wedding.
Right.
I did not even know Margie because her husband, Dave, was Charles's roommate.
Okay.
In the seminary. And so we became the best of friends. We were both Tauruses. We call ourselves sisters from another mother. We're just that close, and that's really a gift, and that's really a treasure, because when you have two best friends who were friends in seminary and they're ministers as well, the wives need to get along, wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
And so when we met, and when she came in February, I believe, after they graduated, she came to Columbia, and that was my first time meeting Margie. And we just hit it off right away.
So it's interesting, kind of. So that's one of the things that Jamie and I do. We talk a lot about what our individual goals are and how we can support each other through those things. And sometimes even I'll have a goal or a vision, and I'm like, wow, this is it. But Jamie will even add his input and say, well, that sounds great. Well, have you thought about this? Why don't you do this? And so it's interesting because a lot of folks talk about some of the things that I'm doing and don't realize that a lot of things I do actually becomes bigger because of Jamie and him pushing me and supporting me to say, do this. So I love how you say that you are kind of jokingly about the book, but your life partner said, no, it's not a joke. You should do this. This is what people should hear. And I love that, because I think so many times couples are thinking about individually and they're not thinking about how they can support each other to do something that is still supportive of togetherness, but it's their own thing. So I love that.
Yeah. And as we began writing, she and I had our apprehensions because, we wondered whether we were saying the right things and whether we should share everything that was in our journals. Some of the things we may not have wanted others to hear.
Right.
But we thought being real was something that was needed in this day and time, especially with the younger ministers' wives and younger wives as well, and women in general, men in general. People need to be more real. People need to be who they really are. And that's when people can appreciate you, when you can share some of the things that others have been through, and in a helpful way. And then others know that, yes, you've been hurt. Yes, you've gone through some pain, but guess what? You've come through it. You've come through victoriously.
That's right.
And so my message in my book, is, yes, we know God's will and plan, but at the same time, He will bring us through. And when He brings us through, oh my gosh, in such a way that you live a more victorious life, where you can help others. And so our thing is, Margie and I are on a book tour. And we're hoping to reach as many ministers' wives and women across the nation that we can. My son, Reverend Charles Jackson Jr., put it on his Facebook page. I'll never forget, because I'm not a Facebook person. And when the book first came out, he put the book out and he said, everybody should read my mom's book and Margie's book, he said, because this book not only will help ministers' wives, but it will help women and men as well. And so I think men need to see, and Tameika, our sides as well, and how we feel, and as well as we know how they feel in life and in the marriage and in relationships. It's also a book about friendships. It's important to have a dear friend. And Margie and I, as I said, have been friends for over 40 years. We never thought that we would be a friend, but look at what God did. They brought two other friends together, and the wives became the best friends. Right. And so we often say, if anything happened to Charles and Dave, we would still be friends. That's right. But we know Dave and Charles would be friends. That's right. So the book, I hope, is a blessing to not only ministers' wives, but women in general, men.
How can people get the book if they're interested in it?
The book is on Amazon. The book is also in the bookstore in Greenville, South Carolina, one of the Christian bookstores. Okay. And we have the book in our bookstore here at the Brookland Baptist Church as well.
Great.
So, Pastor, when Tameika and I first got together, before we got married, we did counseling with you. And I remember that very vividly. And you talked extensively about different things that we should look for, some pitfalls, some of the good and some of the bad of marriage. And one of the things that you emphasize, and we emphasize it now in our marriage, is this thing of family night. Can you speak a little bit about family night and the importance of how you came about that and how you used it in your counseling and in your personal marriage?
Having begun preaching at an early age and taking note of some of the senior pastors, I noted that in far too many instances, the children of pastors were not very successful or high achieving children. And I began reasoning as I looked about it that perhaps one of the reasons may have been was because pastors were so very busy caring for the people of the church ministry to the neglect sometimes of their own family.
Wow.
Thinking that the family is all right because he's there in the family. So I made a conscious effort. It was intentional to make sure I spend time with my family. And so therefore on Tuesdays and Friday nights became family nights for us, which meant that it mattered not what I was doing in the ministry on a Monday or Wednesday or Thursday or Saturday or Sunday. Our family knew that husband and dad would be with them on Tuesdays and Friday nights. I think it has served us well. So that became very quality time for us. And that did not mean that we would not be together on other nights, but we tried not to let anything interfere with those nights to which we've committed ourselves as family.
That's good. That's good. That's good. And we do the same. So our family night is Friday night.
Oh, good.
So Friday night for us.
That's very important because you get so very busy pursuing your career, man, engaged in your profession or whatever it is you're doing, that you sometimes take for granted that your family is going to be there and understand. Now, one of the reasons I encouraged her to write that book was because I believe strongly that any woman who can deal with my very demanding schedule for some 40 years and then serve with a great deal of dignity and pride as First Lady of the Brookland Church and raise two pretty high achieving children and still retain her looks and her good health and her sane mind has something to say that other women ought to want to hear.
That's right. That's right.
Has something to say that other women ought to. How did you do it, Mrs. Jackson?
That's it.
Thank you.
That's it. I agree.
That's so important because, when I asked the question before about support too, I mean, I think it needs to be repeated that you started as a youth pastor. You started a small country church. You built Brookland Baptist Church to over 8,000 members, one church, 2 locations, international impact. You do missions work in other countries. You have presidents who have called upon you guys and have been here and visited here at Brookland. And so your impact is felt worldwide. But I think so many times people forget, they see the person, they see the pastor, and they don't think about the fact that in order to be a successful pastor and have this international impact, you had to have a life partner who not only, is there to support you, but also there to, hear when things aren't going great, to, to lift you up, to maybe be your outlet. And so kind of tell us how is that? Because I think sometimes people feel like I don't want to burden my family, or I don't want to, tell the person I love when I'm depressed or things aren't working right. How does that work for you guys? How do y'all have those conversations, and do you feel like it's important to be able to have that outlet when you come home?
Are you speaking of talking to each other about the concerns of the ministry? Okay.
Yeah, and being able to be, just free with whatever. Because I'm sure there is times that you feel like as, Pastor Jackson, I've got to be on top of everything. Because, of course, when we see you, and we know the last couple of years with the loss that y'all had in church and the ministers, and you ministered to so many people. You ministered to us during the loss of our son. So you have to deal with so much. And then, so I know that can be hard. So how do y'all kind of deal with that when you have to, not also have to, part of your role is supporting each other. How do y'all have those conversations and just be able to release that with all the pressure that you might have?
One thing I can say is our home is a safe haven, and it's always been that way.
That's good. That's good.
We never imposed anything on our home life from the church, from the beginning. My whole family was led to enjoy life as it is. Our family life is just something that we just do. We are ordinary people. In fact, we do the ordinary things that everybody do. There are big pots on the stove. You know, I sew and clean house and do things that other people do. Okay, but when we come home, it's a place where we can be ourselves, and our children feel the same way. I've always told my kids, be yourself. You don't have to impose, be different. Just be yourself. So when we come home, it's just a time when we are just ourselves, I think. We don't have much time to talk about the ministry because we're home. It's about home life.
So it's about you all.
Yes, it's about home life. Now, he may mention it's a funeral or something going on or something, or something about a member, or not about a member, but something going on within the church.
Right.
But home is a time when we just enjoy family and
enjoy each other.
and we put on our relaxing clothes and we're just home.
I want to think that we believe in the God that each other has. She believes in the God spirit that I have. I believe in the God spirit that she has. And then that trust factor that becomes very, very important to us. And that has helped sustain us through the years with all the heaviness that we find ourselves sometimes having to carry.
That's good. That's
We both
good.
know God.
That's good.
And that's a good thing.
And that's important.
And have a personal relationship
Right.
with the Lord
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. That's important. And so that's the perspective from which we view everything that we do.
And we're comfortable with ourselves.
Right.
And that's so important in
Mama mentions
relationships.
that in the book.
Yeah, it's so important that you know who you are.
Right.
And I tell that to a lot of women. You know who you are and whose you are. You know, and feel comfortable with who you are.
Right.
And then you won't have to look for the other person to define you.
Right.
Because you feel comfortable with who you are. I think that's how I've made it in this ministry so long. When I sit in church, people look at the Brookland Baptist Church is a big church, and they tell me that, you all go to that big church over there. I really have not gotten to the point where I see that.
Right.
I still see myself as the same little Robin that attended the church on Monticello Street. I mean, I see no difference. I mean, in fact, my studio is not far from the church. And I can look at the church that was on Monticello Street and think back in the day of the things that we would do there, the Girl Scouts and playing the organ and different things in the choir. But then I can also see this church, but it doesn't have such a big impact on me and make me be different.
Right.
I'm not
still
different.
you.
Right.
You're still you.
I sit on that front row and it's okay.
Right.
I don't wear big hats.
Right.
I don't pretend.
Right.
I am me. Sometimes I have to catch myself because I'll throw my arm across the seat and get too relaxed.
Right.
And then I'll
Right.
go, okay,
Right.
I am in church.
That's right. That's right.
But it's all about listening to the minister. I don't see him, as anything separate but a man of God on Sunday morning. And so it's nothing different. And that's so important that we can be ourselves.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
Being yourself is good. Being yourself is good. So while we're talking about that, so just want to hear from you all individually for younger couples who are just getting married, 1 to 5 years, those who are in the middle, kind of like Tameika and I, and those who may be more veterans and more seasoned persons who are married. What type of advice, what type of things would you tell about marriage that will help them continue on the road of marriage?
I did a class some years ago called Surviving and Thriving for women who've been married 1 to 5 years.
I did that class. That was, we were there like 2 years at that
You were
time.
in that class?
Yeah.
And that class had such an impact on women until some of the husbands were coming to me and saying, you know what, you need to do it again.
All right.
Or maybe you need a class for men.
Right.
But I'm saying that to say that we reached a lot of women. One thing I would say to young couples is trust God. Know that He's God. He's God all by Himself. He has already placed in you who He wants you to be and who He wants you to be with, according to His will and His plan. Trust God, believe God, and He will direct your path.
Right. But Jamie, Tameika, I think it's become rather evident who the talker is in this family. I'm a man of a few words.
Yes, sir.
But
Yes,
there
sir.
are two words
Ditto.
that are powerfully significant in meaning in sustaining a marriage. And those two words are given to us during the ceremony. And those two words are I do.
All right.
I do. I do speaks of the commitment
That's
made
right.
to the marriage.
Yes, sir.
I do accept Robin as she is, though there may be some things undesirable about her. She does accept me as I am, though there may be some things that are undesirable. And we will pray. And as she has said, trust God to help us work through the things that may be undesirable, some challenges that we may personally have ourselves.
Right.
Because the challenge that we face is this. Inevitably, we think we can change the other person.
That's right.
And that's become, that's so very difficult. And that's why I said the spiritual perspective is so very, very important. Because the truth of the matter is we really cannot change ourselves. And so if I set out to change Robin sets out to change me, it's going to suppress our individuality. And it's going to harm us later on down the road. So those two words are very important to understand and embrace what two words I do actually mean. When you come to that altar and you say to the officiating minister, I do accept her, I do accept him, then we're going to put everything else in God's hands.
All right.
That's commitment to the words I do.
All right.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen to
Amen
that.
on that one.
Amen.
Well, that is a wonderful way to end. Thank you guys so much
Thank you.
Yes.
for supporting us in this vision and sharing and being our first guest
Yes.
for Date Night with the Devines. It is a blessing and a privilege for us to be able to have lunch with you guys. So thank you.
And thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you. And our prayers will continue to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us for the very first episode of Date Night with the Devines. We want to thank our sponsors. We've got Isaac Insurance Agency, State Farm. We also have Jabber and Isaac and Dr. Macy Smith. And of course, our venue sponsor, Brookland Baptist Banquet and Conference Center. So for your next event, or if you're having lunch or you need a venue to host something, please consider Brookland Baptist Banquet and Conference Center. We have enjoyed being here. So until next time, thank you so much. I'm Tameika,
And I'm Jamie.
and we are the Devines.